What's up guys, Sagi here and welcome to another Tech Gear Talk. Today we're going to compare two of my favorite cameras, the Canon M50 and the Fuji X-T30. The M50 is a super user-friendly APS-C sensor camera from Canon with great autofocus, 4K video, and built-in time-lapse. The X-T30 is a very impressive 26 megapixel APS-C sensor camera from Fuji with outstanding image quality, versatile frame rate options for video, and awesome film simulation modes. I've used both cameras for a while now, and I've already published dedicated reviews, so if you're interested in some more information, I'll leave links in the description and at the end of this video. As usual, there are things that I liked and things that I disliked about each of the cameras, and I'm gonna talk about their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to both photography and video. And hopefully I can help you decide which option is best for you. My goal with every product comparison is to give you a detailed overview of the product and then compare them in a way that relates to real life use. And my reviews and comparisons tend to be on the longer side because I do my best to share actual user experience with you rather than just the specs. Okay, enough of that, let's get started. And I'm gonna get into the details for each aspect of both cameras, but I quickly wanna go over some key features in case you're just starting your research. I'm also going to include some extra images and footage at the end of this video, so make sure you watch it to the end. The M50 is a compact and portable mirrorless camera. It has a 24 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor and uses the Digic 8 processor. It shoots video at up to 4K at 24 frames per second and Full HD or 1080p at up to 60 frames per second. It uses Canon's super nice dual pixel autofocus system, has a 3-inch fully articulating touchscreen LCD, and a combination IS uses 5-axis digital stabilization with lens-based IS. There's a really nice 2.36 million dot OLED electronic viewfinder, and it has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, so you can easily move images to your mobile device and have full remote control of the camera. The X-T30 features a 26.1 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor and uses the X processor 4. It has a hybrid autofocus system with 425 phase detection points that cover nearly the entire sensor. It has a 3-inch 1.4 million dot two-way tilting LCD touchscreen and a high-resolution OLED electronic viewfinder. You can internally record 4K 30 frames per second at up to 200 megabits per second, and you have super fast continuous shooting at up to 30 frames per second. It can record Full HD or 1080p at up to 120 frames per second for great slow motion, and it has integrated Bluetooth 4.2, which allows you to wirelessly share images to a mobile device or use the device to remotely control the X-T30. I want to start out by talking about the sensor and the processor, and I do my best to answer every question that I can, so if you have any comments or questions, go ahead and put them in the comment section below. The M50 comes with a 24 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor, and the X-T30 comes with a 26 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor. The X-T30 sensor is BSI or backside illuminated, meaning that some of the elements were moved to the back of the sensor with the goal being better low light performance. Fuji did an excellent job with this sensor, and in my experience, the X-T30 performed better in low light than the M50 for both photography and video. The Fuji APS-C sensor has a crop factor of 1.5x and the Canon APS-C sensor has a crop factor of 1.6x. That means that if I put a 50mm lens on the M50 and apply a 1.6 crop factor, it will give me a 35mm equivalent field of view of 80mm. On the other hand, if I put the same lens on the X-T30, apply a crop factor of 1.5x, I'm getting a 75mm equivalent field of view. This means that the Fuji provides a slightly wider angle of view, but it's not a big enough difference for it to be a deciding factor for me. In terms of sensor, I'm going to give the X-T30 the edge here because it has better low light performance and a slightly lower crop factor. As far as processors, the M50 uses the Digic 8 processor and the X-T30 uses the X processor 4. In both cases, I found that the combination of sensor and processor produced very nice images and video for me. On top of that, general menu operation was fast for both cameras. Things like startup was very quick, and then image preview and video playback were very responsive. Because of how I shoot, one of the features that I look at for every camera that I get is continuous or burst shooting. You can just point the camera at a subject, hold down the shutter, and the camera will just keep firing. And this is a nice feature if you're photographing pets, kids running around, if you're shooting sports, or any fast-moving subjects. And of course, the more frames you have per second, the more exposures you'll have to pick from later on. The M50 can shoot it up to 10 frames per second in burst mode, and the X-T30 can shoot it up to 30 frames per second if you're willing to use the electronic shutter. This fast burst shooting on the X-T30 comes at the cost of a 1.25x crop, but you can get rid of this crop if you're willing to step down to 20 frames per second, which is still extremely fast. If you don't want to use the electronic shutter and you want to switch over to a mechanical shutter, we're now looking at 8 frames per second, and I talk about the differences between a mechanical shutter and electronic shutter in my detailed review. When we look at buffer memory, we see that Canon reports 36 JPEG and 10 RAW images for the M50 versus Fuji reporting 26 JPEG and 17 RAW images for the X-T30. This means that, again, you'll have to decide what's more important to you. If you want the fastest burst shooting, giving you the most options to choose from for a shorter period of time, then you're gonna go with the X-T30. If, on the other hand, you want to hold down the shutter and shoot for a longer period, giving you more choices overall, then the M50 is going to work out better for you. I'm not going to give the edge to either one of them in terms of burst shooting because different people have different requirements and it comes down to what's important to you. If you want to know what I would choose for how I shoot, I would rather have the faster burst shooting of the X-T30 because when I use burst shooting, I'm trying to get like an exact moment, and I'm more likely to do that with more options to choose from. Okay, moving on, one of the most important things for me with any tool that I use is ergonomics, and I look at it in terms of both handling and functionality. As far as size, both cameras are small, which makes them great options for travel cameras or street photography. Both cameras are essentially identical in dimensions and weight. I like the deeper grip on the M50, but I like the slightly taller body of the X-T30, so it's going to be a draw for me as far as handling. The X-T30 definitely feels like it has better build quality, but neither one reports weather sealing to make them dust or moisture resistant. As far as battery life, the M50 uses the LPE12 battery, which is rated for 235 shots using the viewfinder and the LCD. On the other hand, the X-T30 uses the NPW126S lithium-ion battery with a rating of 380 shots. Here I'm going to give the clear edge to the X-T30. It's not the best battery life that I've seen in a mirrorless camera, but the M50 has a fairly poor battery life. I do have a few solutions for the M50 battery life situation, and I'll link to that video up in the corner and in the description. When it comes to charging, the M50 comes with a dedicated battery charger, so you can charge additional batteries while the camera is in use. The X-T30 does not come with a battery charger, and you charge the battery inside the camera using the included USB-C cable. If you end up buying extra batteries for the X-T30, just remember that you'll also want to pick up a charger so that you can charge your batteries while you're using the camera. Let's move on to talk about the viewfinders. And both cameras have a DSLR style design with the viewfinder protruding from the top of the camera. While this makes the cameras a little taller, some photographers like to be able to keep both eyes open so they can still be aware of what's going on outside of their frame. Both cameras have a 0.39-inch EVF, but the X-T30 has a faster refresh rate of 100 frames per second, which can lead to smoother viewing experience when panning or following a subject. Next, I want to discuss the buttons and dials on both cameras. I think that if you're buying a nice camera and you're using it just with the basic camera settings, then you're really missing out on the potential of the camera. Part of what you get when you're buying a higher end camera is the ability to customize it to work better for how you shoot. The M50 only has one top dial, and you have to use the top arrow button to alternate between aperture and shutter speed. There is, however, a functions button at the top, and there are plenty of other buttons in the back that you can assign to many of the features in the menu. The X-T30 has a shutter speed dial at the top, as well as one for exposure compensation. We also have a front command dial and a rear command dial for dedicated and more precise control. On the left side, you'll see the drive dial, which lets you very quickly move from movie mode to single shooting, continuous shooting, and various bracketing options. I also like the fact that Fuji implemented a focus stick, which is this little joystick on the right side that you can use to move the focus point around. And this joystick is also used instead of the 4-way arrow controls that we see on the M50. I don't ever end up using the shutter speed dial on the top because I don't like that functionality, but I like having two dials on the front and on the back. In terms of buttons and dials, I'm going to give the edge here to the X-T30 because having dedicated aperture and shutter speed dials is great. Both cameras have a quick menu option which quickly brings up a lot of the most commonly used functions right to your fingertips. Both cameras offer touch functionality on the LCD for these features, but I find the M50 menu to be simpler to use and the touch functionality on the screen seems more responsive and accurate to me. Looking at the menu system, I like how simple and organized the M50 main menu is. And there's still full touchscreen functionality on the main menu, which you lose on the X-T30. As far as ease of use, I'm going to give the edge here to the M50. The quick menu system is great, the touchscreen felt more responsive and accurate, and the main menu is simple to follow even for beginners and includes touch functionality. Moving on, next I want to talk about resolution, frame rate, and image quality. For photography, the M50 offers a 6000 by 4000 pixel image, and the X-T30 offers a 6240 by 4160 image. So as far as strict head-to-head resolution, the slight edge goes to the X-T30. Both cameras shoot in JPEG and RAW, so you can decide just how much information you want to capture depending on what you plan on doing with the images in post-production. In lower ISO values, I was super happy with the images I got from both cameras for the price. And the photos were clean and crisp, and I really loved the color processing from both Canon and Fuji. When I started shooting with increased ISO values, I definitely saw less noise in the X-T30, the images were cleaner, and I felt that I got more usable results at higher ISO values. In terms of image quality, I'm going to give the advantage to the X-T30 because of the slightly higher resolution and the improved low light performance of the sensor. I can do a more detailed image comparison in another video, and if that's something that you're interested in, let me know in the comment section and make sure that you're subscribed and that you have notifications turned on. Moving on to video, the M50 can shoot 4K at 24 frames per second and Full HD or 1080p at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. The X-T30 can record 4K video at 24 and 30 frames per second and Full HD at 24, 30, 60, and 120 frames per second. Just looking at the specs doesn't tell the whole story. 4K on the M50 is limited by an additional crop factor of 1.7x, which makes it challenging to get wide shots. Another limitation with 4K on the M50 is that the dual pixel autofocus is replaced by a contrast detection system, which is slower and less accurate. The X-T30 has significant advantages here with no crop factor for 4K 24, an additional frame rate option for 4K 30, 120 frames per second in Full HD for great slow motion, and the fact that 4K isn't impacted by inferior autofocus. There is one limitation that I wanted to bring up with the X-T30. When you're recording 4K, there is a 10-minute recording time limit. Overall, in my opinion, 4K footage and functionality from the X-T30 is better than the M50. So if that's a feature that you're looking for, I would suggest that you go with the Fuji. For 1080p, I'm super happy with the footage I got from both cameras at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second, but again, the X-T30 has the option for 120 frames per second, which gives it the edge. Next, let's talk about time-lapse. And the M50 comes with in-body 4K time-lapse, meaning that the camera will actually compile the time-lapse for you so it's ready to be viewed or used. The X-T30 offers interval shooting, which lets you have full control over your time-lapse. You can drag your shutter and you have more flexibility in getting the results that you want. But once you're done shooting, you will need to take the individual photos and compile a time-lapse video using software. This is where you're gonna have to make a choice. The M50 does all the work for you, so you have a ready-to-view and use time-lapse right out of the camera, but you're more limited in terms of exposure. The X-T30 gives you much more control over your time-lapse and a higher resolution, but it means that you have to do work in post-production. I'm not going to give the edge to either because different users are going to have different preferences. An area where I will give the edge to the X-T30 is that it has a clean HDMI out, so it's a great option when it comes to live streaming. The M50 does not have a clean HDMI out, so the only way to use it for live streaming is to either use manual focus or use special software. Moving on, let's talk about autofocus. And before we get into the specs and all the numbers, I want to tell you that both cameras have outstanding autofocus. The M50 uses Canon's amazing dual pixel autofocus system, and it has somewhere between 99 and 143 autofocus points depending on which lens you use. The X-T30 uses 117 hybrid points, which cover 99% of the sensor, and then are subdivided into 425 points in specific modes like single point autofocus. I also really liked that I can use the joystick on the back of the Fuji to move the autofocus point around rather than having to always touch the screen. For photography, both worked really well and were fast and accurate, with maybe a slight advantage to the X-T30. The eye autofocus has been very good for both cameras, and I absolutely love it when I'm shooting portraits because I don't have to worry about getting the focus point exactly on the subject's eye. I can let the camera take care of that, and I just concentrate on framing. If eyes are not detected by the cameras, then both will revert back to face tracking. Now moving on to video, I've always been a fan of Canon's dual pixel autofocus, and the M50 doesn't disappoint. I'm completely confident that when the camera is facing me, my face is identified, I'm being tracked, and that there will be no hunting. The X-T30 also has face tracking, which has worked really well, and I didn't experience the type of hunting that I sometimes got from older Fuji models. An advantage of the M50 for video is that it offers subject tracking in addition to face tracking, meaning that I can click on any subject in the frame and the M50 will keep it in focus even as it's moving through the frame. On the other hand, if you plan on shooting 4K, the X-T30 wins this by a mile because the M50 loses a dual pixel autofocus in 4K and now uses a much slower and less accurate contrast detection system. So to recap, the X-T30 has more autofocus points, which cover a larger portion of the sensor. It felt faster and more accurate when shooting stills, especially for continuous autofocus, and has a noticeably superior autofocus system when shooting in 4K. The M50 has simpler to use autofocus modes and offers subject tracking for video. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about the screen. The M50 has a 1.04 million dot 3-inch fully articulating screen that can be tilted up, down, it can be directed to both sides, and it could be turned 180 degrees to face the front. The X-T30 has a 1.04 million dot 3-inch LCD screen, which can be tilted up or down. If you take into account different types of photography, using the camera on a slider or a gimbal, there's no question that the advantage here goes to the M50 in terms of screen positioning. Both companies refer to their screen as touchscreens, but the M50 has a full touchscreen while the X-T30 only has a partial one. So on the M50, you can navigate the menu, the quick menu, you can select options and features from the screen, and you can touch or drag to focus. But on the X-T30, you can only use the touchscreen functionality for focus and for the quick menu. So you can't use it for the main menu. I also feel that the M50 touchscreen is more accurate and responsive, so I'm gonna give the advantage to the M50. Moving on, I think a lot of people forget to consider lens options when choosing between cameras from different brands. The EFM mount options are quite limited at this time, and I'm not sure if Canon plans on significantly expanding this lineup. Fuji has an outstanding range of lenses, particularly fast primes, which will cover what most users are ever going to need. I also like how small and light their primes are because we're talking about putting them on a small body, and this is true for the Canon EFM lenses as well. Now, if you get the EF to EFM adapter for the M50, you now have access to the entire Canon line of lenses, as well as some outstanding third-party options. If I compare Canon's EFM mount to Fuji's X mount, Fuji's a clear winner here. But if I add the entire line of Canon lenses with the adapter, then this decision swings in Canon's favor because there are more affordable options, but with the note that the adapter does make each lens longer, which increases the overall size of the rig. I'll put links in the description to some of my favorite lenses for each camera, and those links will always be updated with the lowest prices. The next set of features that I want to talk about have to do with audio. Both the M50 and the X-T30 have an external mic input, so you can use an external microphone to get much better audio than you would get using the camera's built-in microphone. An advantage of the M50 is that it uses a traditional 3.5mm input jack, whereas the X-T30 uses a 2.5 input jack, which will most likely require you to get an adapter. A big advantage of the X-T30 is that the audio level display is always available on the LCD when you're in movie mode. So as you're preparing to record, and even while you're recording, you can see the levels. On the M50, you have to go into the menu to see and adjust audio levels before recording. You can't see them while you're recording, and you can't make any adjustments without stopping the recording. So again, if you're shooting video, the X-T30 still wins this for me when it comes to audio options. I don't like having to use an adapter, but the flexibility of monitoring and adjusting audio levels while shooting is a big plus. I also recently put out a video discussing the importance of audio for video, and I'll link to it up in the corner and in the description. Moving on, I also want to talk about other features that these cameras have that could help you make a buying decision. First, I want to talk about image stabilization. Now, the M50 does not have sensor shifting in-body image stabilization, but it does offer in-body digital image stabilization, which can work together with lens-based IS. The X-T30 also doesn't have image stabilization, and you'll have to rely on lens-based OIS. The next thing I want to talk about is the apps. The M50 uses the Canon Camera Connect app, and the X-T30 uses Fuji's Camera Mode app. With both apps, you can control shooting modes, shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and white balance for both photography and video. For stills, you can also control things like self-timer, continuous shooting settings, and there are some flash options. For video, you can adjust your frame rate, movie format, and you can start and stop recording. The biggest difference is that the Canon Camera Connect app lets you both see and change focus points and mode using the app. On the Fuji app, the autofocus is working, but you can't see where the focus point is, you can't change it, and you can't change focus modes. Both apps let you preview and transfer images and video to your mobile device, so that's really nice. I'm going to give the edge here to the M50 because the focus feature on the app is critical for how I shoot. Okay, so which camera is a better value and which one should you get? And in order to make this decision, we need to look at cost. And at the time that I'm making this video, the Canon M50 costs $629 and the X-T30 costs $900. So that's a big difference when we're looking at this price point. The M50 has a fully articulating full touchscreen, can do in-body time-lapse, is easier to use for beginners, offers digital image stabilization, has a longer recording limit in 4K, uses a better app, and is less expensive. The X-T30 has better resolution and more frame rate options, better video and image quality, more autofocus points, better autofocus in 4K, better low light performance, faster burst shooting, a larger buffer, more dials and custom buttons, a better battery life, a clean HDMI out, and better audio features. I always say that you can't have everything in any camera, so it comes down to which features are important to you for how you shoot. I do my best to answer every question, so if you have any questions at all, put them in the comment section below. I'll put links in the description to where you can get the M50 and the X-T30, as well as some popular kits and accessories, and there are always holiday specials and discounts, so the links will be updated with the lowest prices. If you end up ordering anything using those links, you can support my channel for free and help me create more content for you, so thank you in advance. I also have links in the description to the more detailed review of each camera in case you want a more in-depth look. I really hope this video gave you a good comparison between the Canon M50 and the Fuji X-T30. I'd love to hear in the comments section which option is best for you. If this video was helpful, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up, tweet it, share it, and if you haven't yet, join the community by hitting the subscribe and notification buttons. You can always find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Tech Gear Talk, and you know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck, and see you soon.